This autumn, fall into the sounds of your favorite podcast at the Berkshire Podcast Festival. This October, I'll be meeting up with some of my favorite podcasts for peak fall foliage in beautiful Berkshire County, Massachusetts, and I want you to join me. I'll be live at the Berkshire Podcast Festival October 19th in North Adams, Massachusetts for an incredible podcast event and live show featuring tons of podcasts, including Justin from Generation Y, Lucy from Wine and Crime, Robin from The Trail Went Cold, and Charlie from Crime Lines, along with so many other talented shows. The Berkshires are conveniently located in western Massachusetts, which is just a quick trip from Albany, Boston, New York, Montreal, and Philadelphia. So if you're in those areas, please come and explore the world-class museums, the birthplace of farm-to-table dining, and the epicenter of the Gilded Age. And then soak up the sounds of some of your favorite podcasts for this weekend-long event. To buy tickets, see who's coming, and learn more about the Berkshires, go to berkshirepodcastfestival.com. And if you want to save 20% off of your tickets, you can use Fall Into the Sound right now. See you there. Welcome back to It's Haunted, What Now? I'm your host, Lainey. Hey, guess what? It's September, and I don't care how early you may think it is, but I'm already getting into the spooky season spirit. I mean, honestly, I have been since July, if I'm going to be honest. I'm ready for the shorter days, darker nights, and warm beverages while we hear creepy stories, no matter how scared they make us. Today's episode has a curated mix of scary stories and some landing right down onto the, heck no category. I recommend keeping the lights on for this one. Okay, ready to get spooked? For our first story, Outer Nerd spooks us with the girl that simply wanted attention. I can relate. Hello. So I grew up in a town called Whittier, California. It's actually a pretty big town, but they intentionally rarely build new things. Big stores, stuff like that to keep it looking like that classic small town. If you saw Back to the Future, the high school Marty went to was my high school. A ton of things have been filmed there. I just mentioned this because I moved into a house with my mom and brother when I was about 13 or 14. It was definitely old. I had seen some better days, but that's just how all the houses were then. I had this IKEA nightstand next to my bed, and not too long after living there, I would come to my room and notice the drawers were a little open. No big deal. Maybe I forgot to close them all the way, or it got knocked. I kinda shrugged it off, but as time went on, it was pretty much every day I would go into my room and the drawers would be open. I was an introverted kid, liked to just hang in my room, and one night I actually saw the top drawer opening. Just very slowly sliding open. Definitely at that point, little alarms were going off, but you don't want to think, I bet there's a ghost. So I tried to ignore it, close them when I saw it, but a few hours later, I would see they had opened again. It got to the point where I would tape them closed because it was getting annoying. I think whatever it was annoyed they couldn't open the drawers anymore, because one day I was taking a nap and felt what I thought was my nieces and nephews repeatedly pushing down the foot of my bed, trying to wake me up. I even remember saying, "Hey guys, leave me alone, okay?" Since I had worked a later shift at my job. This was a few years after moving in, and I wanted to sleep in. When I eventually got up, I went to see my mom and asked, "When did the kids leave?" She looked confused and said, "What do you mean? The kids weren't here." I told her, "Yeah, they were trying to wake me up." And she just said again, they had never been over. There were times we would have family over and the screen door would open slightly and then slowly close like someone had just walked in. If it was the wind, it would open a few inches and then close, so we were all a little unsettled when it opened all the way and closed gently. The thing that solidified all of this for me was one night I was relaxing in bed, about to go to sleep, and I turned over to my other side, and there was a girl with dark hair laying next to me, smiling. I have never moved so fast in my life. I immediately turned on all the lights I could and just stared at the spot I saw her. Eventually I thought, okay, maybe this was her room or something. When my brother moved out, I decided to move into his room since it was bigger and maybe she would leave me alone. Nope. Drawers started opening, so I started taping them shut again. I would be watching TV and hear her bang on my closet door. All the windows would be closed and I would smell cigarette smoke in my room. No one in my family smoked. One day I was talking to my Nina, my godmother, about this, and she said, "Just tell the ghost to leave you alone. Say you know it's there, but it needs to stop." So I did. One day I sat on my bed and said, "Okay, so I know you're here. I believe you're here. Could you please stop all of this? My mom doesn't believe you're here. Go bother her." I was a teenager, so I was a little petty. Very shortly after that, I had a day off and had just been playing video games all day. My mom walks into the living room and says, "Oh hey, you found my earrings." I had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. She probably saw I looked lost and said, "Yeah, they were on top of my shirt on the ironing board." I told her I had been in the living room basically since I woke up and it wasn't me. I think that was the girl's way of saying she heard me. Little incidents happened over the years, but my drawers did stop opening on their own after I talked to her. Sometimes I think to get my attention, she would still bang on my closet door, but I think once she felt seen, she calmed down. I moved out when I was 24, but all of that still sticks with me. I can still see her face so clearly. I had always believed in ghosts, but that was my first personal encounter. Why do little kids have to be so creepy no matter what state they're in? Your godmother gave you some pretty solid and some of the best advice that I feel we give listeners all the time. But how about next time we keep the pettiness level a little lower and not curse our loved ones, especially our mothers, with invisible guests? Weird Suggestion 152 causes literal chills with a harrowing tale accumulated during their time as a police officer. And we just want to offer a trigger warning. This story contains brief mentions of gore and completion of suicide, so please feel free to skip if it triggers you. I used to be a police officer in a city in Virginia. There is one upscale neighborhood in our city with very nice homes. I was always told stories when I was a new officer about one house in particular where a doctor used to live. The story goes, the doctor attempted to perform some type of operation on himself and numbed his stomach area to make an incision, but since he couldn't feel it, he accidentally went too far and disemboweled himself. When officers and paramedics arrived, he was found barely alive, holding his own intestines, and ultimately died. Fast forward, I was assigned a call about a young female who was found dead by her older sister. When I arrive on scene, it is in the aforementioned nice neighborhood. Not only that, but the same house that doctor lived in. When I exited my vehicle, I immediately had an uneasy feeling about the house. While nice on the outside, it just had bad energy surrounding it. As I approached the front porch, I noticed countless empty energy drink cans and a Ouija board on the front patio table. Everything about this house just felt wrong. When I was let inside, the family was obviously very distraught. I was told the deceased sister, we'll call her Emily, had completed suicide by hanging in the basement. At this point, another officer had arrived, and so he stayed upstairs with the family as I entered the basement. The basement was unfinished and was fairly dark, minus 2 pull-string light bulbs, one on each side of the basement. The scene in the basement was similar to the front porch. Energy drink cans were everywhere, and another Ouija board was on a small coffee table. Emily, who was 19 if I remember correctly, was a harrowing sight, and another officer helped me lift her to bring her down. Emily's family consisted of her mother and father and her older sister. Her parents stated they had been trying to help her because all she ever did was drink the energy drinks to stay up all hours of the night playing the Ouija board. Her sister gave a little more detail about it. Being sisters, she stated they were very close and told each other everything. Her older sister said Emily indeed had been obsessed with the Ouija board, drinking energy drinks to stay up all night to talk to what she believed was her boyfriend who was dead. Her sister stated Emily had been saying that her boyfriend was begging for her to come join him in the afterlife, and so she believed that is why she did what she did. Now, let me reiterate, this house felt wrong. Everything felt bad, and I had a very uneasy, sick feeling being in the basement. It wasn't because of the dead body, because in that line of work, this wasn't my first experience with one. Still, this is a call that really messed with me for a while. We never really get much more explanation, and as cops, you kind of just have to move on to the next call. 2 weeks later to the day, I get a call about a car accident with ejection. I head to the call, code 1, which are lights and sirens, and arrive to find a convertible BMW with the top down, which had experienced an obvious, horrible crash and rollover. It was sitting on its wheels, and in the driver's seat was a woman whose neck was so clearly broken that she was an upsetting sight to see. Next to the vehicle, about 25 feet away, was a man who had been ejected. Keep in mind, this was a convertible, so he was ejected from the top of the car. He was missing the entire top half of his head. It looked like a horror movie. I went to close off the scene with yellow tape. I walked about 75 yards away from the accident, where I found part of his head matter. I'm trying not to be intentionally graphic, but I want to paint the picture of just how bad and violent this car accident was. Upon obtaining the man's ID, I read the information off to dispatch, and then another officer and I both realized the same thing at the same time. These two people were Emily's parents, who 2 weeks to the day just died in a horrible way. Breaking the news to the older sister was heartbreaking. I kept in touch with her for a little while. She had inherited her parents' estate and all of the life insurance money, and she ended up selling off everything and buying a different house to try and start over and repair her broken life. However, it doesn't end there. Around a month later, another officer was called after a pedestrian was struck by a car while she was jogging in her neighborhood. And yes, you guessed it, it was the sister. She managed to survive several weeks in a coma, but ultimately did not make it. I don't know what you guys think, but to me it definitely seems like either that house is cursed or Emily opened up something bad by using the Ouija board. Maybe both. That was a few years ago now, and I'm no longer a police officer. I moved a couple states away. Twice now, I have found 2 different Ouija board planchettes on the sidewalk when going to check my mail. I never touch them, and usually use a stick or something to push them into the storm drain. Okay, well, I am not a fan of that. I really don't even know how to react to that. Very tragic. And I can't even imagine loss after loss after loss happening to this family and ultimately to the sister. And I would agree with you. Sure, the house seems very cursed, but in these instances, my mind sometimes goes to terrible coincidences. And I think I'll let the audience decide what you think. Coincidence or cursed home? Mohammed, who told us a bonus story in episode 91, brings us a few new tales that their parents experienced as children. One weird potential paranormal occurrence happened with my dad when he was very young, around 2 to 3 years old. At the time, he was thought to be mute, and this is Pakistan in the 1960s, so there's no real medical explanation as to why, but my grandparents and aunts and uncles accepted the fact that my dad might never speak. One day, when they were shopping for a new plot of land to purchase for a small farm, my grandma and grandpa took my dad and my aunt, the 2 youngest kids, with them while the other kids were at school. My dad was perfectly normal until he stepped foot into the property. When that happened, my dad said his first 2 words, Alexander, Caesar. These are not common names for Pakistan, but not incredibly uncommon due to the fact that British rule had ended about a decade ago. All of a sudden, 2 large dogs that were nowhere to be seen ran up to my dad and began to play. My grandparents were frightened about how my dad spoke and how he knew the names of 2 dogs about 30 kilometers away from home. When asked about it, my dad responded in Urdu that he didn't know how he knew, he just knew. The same way he knew that there is a beautiful peach tree in the backyard, and under the peach tree there were 2 gravestones. The backyard was not visible to anyone from what I've been told due to the shape of the house, but upon looking, there was a peach tree with 2 gravestones underneath marking the names of Alexander and Caesar. Even though everyone has just seen the dogs walk up to and play with my dad, after that, they never saw the dogs again. According to some neighbors, the land and house belonged to a sort of governor-ambassador for India before the British occupation ended, and when he left in 1946, he left his dogs who died under the peach tree. Pakistani and Muslim people, not having major respect for dogs outside of utilization of farming tools, did not know what to do, so the neighbors buried the dogs under the tree. Another small story is from my mom in India when she was a young girl in the 70s. She was running past the local psychiatric institution when she heard the braying of a donkey coming from inside. She didn't know better and decided to peek her head in through one of the barred windows and saw a man hunched over, braying as if he were a donkey. She didn't think much of it, but one day after hearing his voice for weeks, she decided to give him a carrot, thinking donkeys eat carrots. An older gentleman saw her approaching the window of the asylum and quickly grabbed her and pushed her away. My mom was terrified at the moment, but said that this man saved her life if what he said was true. The gentleman told her, "That man is not a man, but a spirit that has been braying like a donkey for 30 years. No one has fed him or given him water in those 30 years. The last time someone gave it food was the man that is currently braying like a donkey, and that if she had fed him, surely she would be braying like a donkey for the rest of her life." Every day for years, my mom walked past that asylum on her way to school and heard the noise, and one day decided to look into the window again. This time, instead of an old man braying like a donkey, it was a younger woman. My mom said she couldn't have been an adult, maybe a young teenager, but the sound was the same. Even now, my mom will refuse to feed any wild feral or stray animals as a result of that fear. One day we went on a hiking trip and deer were following us, so I grabbed some peanuts out of the trail mix and fed the deer out of my hand, and my mom slapped the food out of my hand and shoved away the deer due to her fears. Wow, you and your family seem to have been some hot spots for experiencing activity. While what your father went through was certainly odd, your mother's story really had the shivers rolling down my back and up my scalp. That spirit essentially body snatching people is right up there on the ever-growing nope list for me. And honestly, I love the folklore of it all. It's honestly, as terrifying as it is, I'm now curious if there is a folklore about this braying donkey. Strange Callings reminds us why we should never stop for hitchhikers. Seriously, never stop for hitchhikers. I had to give an employee a ride home from work one day. Her ride bailed on her and her parents were out of town and she was 15. I wasn't leaving her outside at night to find her own way home miles away. On the way to her house, we passed by what looked like a young blonde woman in a white hoodie with large patches of red. I wasn't paying close enough attention as a driver. The teenager asked me to stop. I said, "No way," and then glanced in the rearview mirror. And there was no girl there. It was a gated community, so unless she jumped a 9-foot stone wall, I have no idea what we saw. But I will not drive through that neighborhood anymore. On other driving-related incidents, I worked a job where I did a lot of driving and passed through this small town. I caught a glimpse of someone on the side of the road, brunette, in a fancy prom quinceañera pageant-looking dress, huge skirt, yellow. I assumed she was there for a photo shoot. 12 hours later, on the way home, I passed through that same town and was chilled to the bone to see a cross on the side of the road covered with artificial yellow flowers. That one's going to stick with me for the rest of my life. Sheesh, thank you for not stopping for this person. Your young coworker did not know better, and it's a good thing you were there to be the voice of common sense. It's not even about being weary of sketchy people, but also, who knows what otherworldly beings are out there waiting for unsuspecting folk to wander across their path. Listen, I need everybody to drive safe, and do not stop for hitchhikers or the lady in white, especially if you're around White Rock Lake. Well, that does it for this episode, unless you're an Apple subscriber, in which case, stay tuned after the credits where you'll get to hear 2 additional stories as a special treat. Well, that does it for this episode. If you'd like to submit your own personal spooky tale to be read on the show, head to hauntedpod.com and click on the link to submit your story. You can also email me, hauntedpod@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a positive review on Apple Podcast or your podcast player of choice. It really does help. You can find us on Twitter, for now, at podcast_haunted, Instagram at It's Haunted What Now, or at hauntedpod.com. Production assistance by Jesse Hawke, writing assistance by Sherilyn Reyes. The official composer and audio smith for the show is Neeks at We Talk of Dreams. Check him out on Twitter at We Talk of Dreams or wetalkofdreams.com. Until next time. Did you hear that?